So launch Godot and you'll end up on the screen like this. So from here, we're going to start a new project by clicking on New Project. We're going to name it Title Screen, and we are going to choose a path where to save the project. Then click on Create Folder. Make sure OpenGL ES 3.0 is selected, which is the renderer used in most modern computers, and click on Create and Edit. Now our project is open and we have a few different docs. In the middle of the screen, we have the scene view. On the top left, we have the scene tree, which will be a tree of all of the objects or nodes, as they are called in Godot, that will be present in our scene. For now, we have nothing, and we'll have to add the first node to get started, which we'll do in a bit. Below that, we have the file system, which shows us all the files that are contained within our project. The res path is basically the root folder that contains everything in our project. And on the right of the screen, we have the inspector, which will display some properties about the object that we are clicking on and that we'll be able to modify, but don't worry about it now because it will start making more sense once we add some stuff in our project. Finally, at the top of the screen, we have some tabs which allow us to save our scenes, or open some files, or tweak some settings. We also have a few tabs that allow us to switch the view of the main dock of the editor. So we can make 3D games, which is the default that is shown, or we can also make 2D games, which is what we'll use in this project, because we're only going to make user interfaces. And we also have a tab to see all of our scripts, but we'll look more into it later. So I'm going to go back to the 2D view. And the first thing we'll do is to tweak the project settings a bit. So go to the project tab on the top left of the screen, click on project, then project settings. And here we'll go down to the window property in the display category. That allows us to tweak some settings about the window where our game will be run. What we'll do is change the width and the height of the window to be 1280 by 720, which is the most common screen aspect ratio on the market right now. Then we can close this window. Then we can import the assets that I have attached to this class, extract the zip file, and you will have these 3 assets inside of it, a background, a button, and a logo. And then we can drag and drop these 3 assets into the file system in Godot, which will import the assets into our project. And now we'll create our first scene. So to create our first scene, we'll add a root node to that scene, which will be of type user interface. So click on user interface, and now we have a scene with one node, which is a control node. We'll start by renaming that node to title screen. So right click on the control node and click on rename and type title screen. And then save that scene by going to the scene tab and clicking on save scene. We'll name it title screen and save it in the root folder of our project. So click on save. And now the scene has appeared in our file system. So now that we have a root node, we'll add more nodes as children of this node to design our title screen. So to do that, we can click on the little plus to add a child node. And first, we'll add a background to our screen. So in this window, we can see all of the different types of nodes that are available to us in Godot. There are 3 main families of nodes, which are the nodes used for 3D games that are red, the nodes used for interfaces, which are green. Those are the control nodes that we'll use in this project. And the blue nodes are the nodes used for 2D games. The node we'll need to add a background to our screen is called a texture rect node. So we can just type this in the search bar and click on create. Then we'll rename it to background. So you can right click and click on rename or click on F2. And you can see in the scene view that the node has been added, but it's tiny and it's positioned at the top left corner of the screen. And we want our image to take the full screen. So what we'll do is click on the layout tab here and click on full rect, which will extend the image to take the full screen. Next, we need to assign the background image to that node. So click on the background.png file that you've imported into the project earlier and drag it into the texture property in the inspector doc on the right of the screen. It should appear on the screen and inside the preview of the property. Next, we'll add a few more nodes to our scene. So click on title screen because we want to add children to the root node of the scene and click on the little plus. We'll need another texture rect node to display the logo of our game. So click on create again and rename it to logo and assign the logo.png file to the texture property of our new node. After that, we'll need 3 more nodes. So click back on the root node and click on the little plus. And those new nodes will be of type button. So search for button, click on create, and we'll have 3 buttons: the start button, the options button, and the exit button. So first we'll rename the first button to start button. And in the text property of our button, we'll write start. You can see that our button is now on the top left corner of our screen, and we'll duplicate it to create 2 more buttons. So right click on the start button node in the node tree and click on duplicate. You can also use the Ctrl and D shortcut. We'll rename it to options button, change the text to options, and we'll do it again for the exit button. So now we have all of the components of our scene, except that it looks very ugly and that it's not organized. So next, we'll change the style of our buttons to look a little bit better. So now we'll make the buttons look a bit better. And the first thing we'll do is to add a custom font to our project. So to do that, you can go on a website called dafont.com, which is a big library of fonts that you can use for free depending on the license. So feel free to pick a font that you like. The font I'll be using is called Nathaniel 19. So once you have chosen a font, you can just download it, extract it, and add it to your Godot project. So I just drag and drop the font file into the project. And now we need to apply it to our buttons. So to do that, we'll create a theme, which is a style that we'll be able to reuse amongst different elements of our game, and especially for the UI. So we'll create a new resource by doing a right click in the file system and clicking on new resource. We'll search for theme and click on create. We'll rename the file to custom theme and save it. And now you should see that a new tab has opened in the bottom of the screen, which is the theme editor tab. To modify it, we'll click on edit theme on the right of the tab, and we'll need to create a new template that we can modify. We can either create a new empty template, or to go faster, we can create a template from the current editor theme, which means the buttons and everything will have the same style as the buttons and the other elements of the editor. So just click on create from current editor theme, and it has updated the style of our buttons instantly. Now we can see that it still doesn't apply to our buttons. It's because we haven't applied the theme to them. To do that, we can just select the root node of our scene, and in the inspector tab under theme, we can assign a theme to this node. What's great about themes is that we can just assign the theme to the parent node, and all of the children will have the same theme applied to them automatically. So drag the custom theme that we created and put it in the theme property. And now it has updated how our buttons look. So we'll go back to our theme editor. To do that, double click on the custom theme resource. And you can also see that on the right under the inspector tab, we have a bunch of new properties that we can edit. And the first property is called default font. It's where we'll be able to set our font, but we can't just drag and drop the file directly in the field. We need to first create a new category of fonts. So we can either choose a bitmap font or a dynamic font, which is just 2 different ways to implement fonts on the backend, but you don't really need to worry about it. We'll just choose new dynamic font, which is the most commonly used. And then if we click here in the field that we just modified, we'll have some new properties pop up, which are the properties of the dynamic font that we just assigned. And here we have a font category where we'll be able to assign the font that we imported into our project. So drag and drop your font into this field, and you can see that the font has been applied to all of our buttons. We can also modify under the settings category the size of our font. So I'll set it to 36, and I'll also add an outline to our font of 3, and I'll change the color of that outline to black. So it already looks a lot better, but now we'll change the background of our buttons. So we'll go back to the theme editor by double clicking on the custom theme resource, and we'll close the font properties by clicking again on the dynamic font field. And now we'll go under the button category. Here we have 2 subcategories called colors and styles. This part will control the color of the font during different events that can happen to the button. For example, if we hover over it or if we click on it. And the second part will control the appearance of the background of the button during those same events. If we click on the little arrow on the right of Stylebox Flat, we can see the different options we have to assign the appearance of our buttons. We can just make it empty. We can have a flat color, which is what is currently applied. Or we can also have a texture, which means an image. And that's what we are going to use. But we don't need to assign everything. For example, we won't have a disabled state or a focused state. So we can just clear them. We'll start by designing the style for the normal state. So we'll click on the little arrow for that state and click on New Style Box Texture. For now, the buttons have disappeared because we haven't assigned an image to them yet. So just like for the font, we'll click on the stylebox texture that we just assigned, and we'll have some new properties. The first one that we'll set is the texture property. So drag and drop the button.png file into that field. We now have our buttons, except it doesn't look right because it's just stretching the image depending on the length of the text. What we want is to be able to have buttons of any size using this simple texture, but we don't want the borders to be stretched, but only the middle of the texture. So to do that, we need to set some margins. We can do it by dragging the dotted lines in the tab that should have appeared at the bottom of your screen, or we can do it through the inspector by setting the margin property. So that's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to set all of the sides to 20. So now we also need to modify the color of the buttons. So go to the modulate property and click on the color. And here you can adjust it to whatever color you want. I'm going to make it brown. And now we are done for the normal state of our button. If you want to see how it looks when you run the game, you can click on this button, which will play the scene. So now we can see that our buttons work. But if we hover over them or if we press them, the style is not the right one, so we have to fix this. To do that, in our theme, we can drag and drop the style that we just created into the other field. So I'll take the style of the normal field and put it in the hover field. And now we can modify this field. But before that, we need to click on the little arrow and click on Make Unique. If we don't do that, Godot will consider that the two styles are the same. And if we modify this one, it will also modify the style of the normal field. So make sure you click on Make Unique. And now we can change the color when we hover over it. So I'm going to go to the modulate property again and tweak the color to be a little bit lighter. And I'm going to do the same for the pressed field, but I'm going to make it a bit darker. So drag and drop the style into the pressed field, click on Make Unique and change the color. So now if we run our scene, we can see that our buttons are working. One last thing that we could do is to change the color of the font when the button is pressed. So I'm going to make it yellow because I think it looks a little bit better. Now our buttons look pretty good, but they are all over the place. So we'll see how we can use container nodes to organize our screen. So in our scene, we'll start by clicking on the title screen root node, then adding a new node, and we'll type VBox container. Then we'll click on create, and I rename it to main menu. So now all of the nodes that we put inside of it will be aligned vertically. So we'll put the logo and the three buttons we created before, and we'll drag them into the main menu. This way they will all be children of the main menu. And as you can see, they are now all aligned vertically. They're also all on the top left of the screen, so if we want them to appear in the middle, we can just increase the size of the main menu node by selecting it and clicking on Layout, then Full Rect, which will make it take the entire screen as we've seen before. We'll also align the logo to the center of the screen, so click on the logo, and in the Stretch Mode property, we'll set it to Keep Centered. And now there are a few more things we want to do. So first, I want to have a bit more separation between the logo and the buttons. So what I'm going to do is to add another VBox container inside the first one. So click on the main menu, add a new child, select VBox container and create it. And I'm going to rename this one to menu options. I'm going to drag the three buttons inside of it. So this way the menu options and the logo are separated. And next I'm going to click on main menu and we have a category that's called custom constant. If we open it, we can see there's a separation field, which allows us to add some space between its children. So toggle it and set it to 30. So now we have some more space between the logo and the buttons. And next, we want the buttons to not take the entire width of the screen. So to do that, we're going to click on Menu Options, and in the Size Flags category, we'll be able to change how its children are displayed horizontally and vertically. So by default, they are set to fill the entire space that they can on both axes, but we want to change that for the horizontal axis. So we're going to toggle the fill property, and we're going to activate the shrink center property. This way, instead of taking up the whole space that they can, they'll just take the minimum amount of space and go to the center of the container. But now they are a little bit too small. So what we can do to increase their size is to go under the rect category. And here we can set a min size on the X and Y axis. So on the horizontal and vertical axis. So there I'm just going to put 300 as the minimum size on the X axis. And now it looks a bit better. One last thing I'm going to do is to lower everything a little bit. So select the main menu node and drag the top component down a little bit. This way I think it looks a bit better. Now that our title screen looks good, we're going to make the buttons functional. To add some logic to it, we'll have to attach a script to our scene and write some code in it to make it so when we click on the start button, it will go to the first level of our game. If we click on the options button, it will go to the options menu. And if we click on the exit button, it will quit our game. To do that, we are first going to click on our title screen node and click on this little button that allows us to attach a script to the node. We have a new window with a bunch of properties. We can choose the language we use, which here will be GDScript, which is the programming language. It inherits the functionalities of the control node because our title screen root node is a control node. We can set a template. The default, we have some comments to help you get started, but we don't really need it. So we're going to use the empty template instead, and we can set a path for our script, but we can just leave it as a default. So now we can click on create, and it has created our new file and moved us to the script view. This is where we'll write all of our code. So for now, there is only one line of code which tells us this script will extend the functionality of the control node, and it has created a new file in our file system, which is called titlescreen.gd, which is associated with our titlescreen.tscn, which is our scene. But before we can write our code, we need to understand what signals are. To connect to the signals, we have to first click on our button, and on the right, you can see we have the inspector tab, which is the one we've been using since the beginning to modify the properties of the node. And we have another tab, which is called node. And if you click on it, you'll see a list of all of the signals that the node is emitting at different times. If we want to connect to a signal, we just have to click on the signal, click on connect, and we'll see a new window that allows us to choose which is the node that wants to connect to the signal. So here we can see we are connecting from the start button, and now we are going to select the title screen node, which is the one where we have added our script. This way we'll be able to write some code in that script to respond to the signal of the start button. The name of the function where we write the code that answers to this signal is what appears in this field. So it's called onStartButtonPressed. So we can just press connect. And now we are back to our title screen script. And there's a new function that has been added, which is called onStartButtonPressed. And this is where we'll tell Godot what we want to happen once the start button is pressed. But first, we're going to do the same thing for the options button and the exit button. So click on the options button. In the node tab, click on pressed, connect. Select title screen and click on connect. And we'll do the same thing for the exit button. Now we can save the file and save the scene. And we're all set up to start writing our code to implement the functionality of the buttons. So when we click on the start button, we want to change the scene to the first level of the game. The first thing we have to do is to create a new scene that represents the first level of the game. So in the File System tab, we're going to right-click on the Res folder and click on a new scene. We'll name it Level. I'm going to go back to the 2D view. We're just going to do a mockup for the level, so we're not going to make a real level. So the root node will also be a user interface node, so a control node. I'm going to rename it to level, and I'm going to save my scene. Inside of that node, I'm going to add a child, which will be a color rect node, which is the same as the texture rect, except we'll be able to just assign a flat color. So click on create, then click on it. I'm going to expand it to take the full screen. So click on layout, full rect. I'm going to go back to the inspector tab and change the color property to be a dark blue. Then I'm going to add another child to the level node called center container. This way we'll just center everything. It will be simpler. I'm also going to expand it to take the whole screen. Click on layout and full rect. And inside that container, I'm just going to add a node called label, which is used to display a simple text. So click on label, create, and I'm going to call it level. We can see that our font is not applied to this node, and it's because we haven't applied the theme to all of the nodes of our scene. So select the level node, and under the theme category, we're going to assign our custom theme. So drag and drop it inside the field, and we can see that our font has been applied. So now we want to add another button that will allow us to go back to the main menu. This way it would just be more practical to test our title screen. So we want the button to appear below the text. So we have to align them vertically. It means we have to add a vertical container inside the center container. So select VBox container and click on create. I'm going to put the label inside of it. And I'm going to select the VBox container and add another child, which will be the back button. So I'm going to search for button, click on button, create. I'm going to rename it to back button, and I'm going to set the text to back. If I go down a bit, I can also modify in the rect category, the mean size property to be 300. And I can align the label in the center. So clicking on the label, I'm going to change the align property to be center. So now if we want our back button to work, we need to attach a script to it. So click on back button and click on attach script. We're going to create an empty script and name it back button. It's fine. Click on create. And now we are in the new script for the back button. Just like for our title screen, we need to connect the signal of our back button to our script, so that we can write some code to respond to that signal. And since the script is on the back button itself, we'll just connect the button to itself. So click on the button, click on the node tab, select the pressed signal, click on connect, and we're going to connect to the back button itself. Click on connect. Now we'll save our script and save our scene. And now we can write some code. So right now we have two scenes, the title screen and our level. And we want to be able to go back and forth between them when we click on the start button in the title screen and in the back button on the level. So I'm going to go back to the script view, and in my back button script, I'm going to replace this line because it's an empty function, but we are going to replace it with some actual code. So delete it, and everything we are going to write now will be inside of this function. So what we are going to do is really simple. We're going to write get tree. So this is a function that already exists inside of the button node. Because we extend the functionality of the button, we have access to its functions. And this allows us to get a reference to the scene tree, which means an object that represents all of the nodes inside of our scene. Actually, if you hold Control and click on the function, we can see some documentation about how the function is implemented, what it returns, and what it does. But let's go back to our script. Getting access to this object gives us some functionality that allows us, for example, to change scenes. So if we write dot, we can see all of the functions that are available to us in this object. So there are a lot of them, but the one that is interesting to us is change scene. So if you just click on change scene, or you can also just write it yourself, this function will allow us to go back to the title screen. So this is the name of the function, and we call it by writing these parentheses. And inside of these parentheses, we can tell it which scene we want to go to. So since we want to go to the title screen, we can actually just go to our file system and find our title screen scene and drag and drop it inside of the parentheses. This way it will retrieve the path automatically. We could also just have written it, or if we delete it and hold Control and click on space, we can see all of the different options that we can put there. So we only have 2 scenes, so we can choose which scenes we want to go to. So if we select title screen, it does the same thing. So now if we go to our level scene and run the scene, if we click on the back button, it will send us to the title screen. So this is working as we want for the level scene, and we're going to do the same thing for the options page. So we'll duplicate this scene, find it on the file system and click on duplicate, name it options and click on duplicate. Now it has created a new scene called options. Double click on it to open it. And we are going to rename the root node to options and change the text to options. This way we'll be able to test if we are going to the right scene or not. Now save the scene and we can go back to the title screen. So now we have to make our 3 buttons work. So go to the script view, and in the title screen.gd script, we're going to do the same thing as we did for the back buttons of our scenes. But instead of going back to the title screen, we're going to go to the level scene for the start button and to the options scene for the options button. So write get tree, which retrieves the scene tree object that gives us some functionality. Write dot to access its functions, then change scene, and we can select the level scene. So when we click on the start button, it will change the scene to the level scene. We can copy this line and put the same thing when the options button is pressed, but we are going to change the level scene to the options scene. And finally, we'll call another function of the scene tree to quit the game if the player presses the exit button. So instead of change scene, we're going to write quit. So now we are going to test our logic. So we can run the scene as usual, or we can also click on play, which will play the project. But if we do that, we have to set a main scene. So we're going to set our title screen as the main scene. So click on select the title screen scene, click on open, and now pressing play will always run this scene. So let's see if it works. Click on the start button and it brought us to the level scene. If we click on back, it brings us back to the title screen. The options button does the same, but for the options scene. If we click on back, it works too. And if we click on exit, it will quit the game. So our menu is fully functional. Now we'll add a bit of polish by making the player be able to control the menu with the keyboard. To add keyboard control to our game, we need to do a few things. First, I'm going to go back to the title screen script. So you can click on the little icon next to the node, or just go back to the script view and make sure you're in the title screen.gd file. And there I'm going to add a new function. So until now we had 3 functions that responded to the signals of the buttons, but there are also a lot of other functions that respond to other events. For example, we'll add a new function which is called _ready, then open the parentheses and put colons. And this function is basically called when the node is created in the scene tree. So everything we write inside of this function will be run directly when we launch the scene. And what we need to do here is to first put a tab. So everything we write will be inside of that function. And we need to retrieve the start button and make it selected by default when we launch the scene. And once we do that, we'll be able to switch between the options with the keyboard. The only reason we are not able to do that right now is because we don't tell Godot which options should be selected by default. So it doesn't know what it should do when we press the up or down arrows. So to do that, we need to get a reference to the start button. So type the $sign, and you can see that the auto-completion gives us different options. And those options are actually paths from the node where the script is. So here is the title screen, which is the root node, to all of its children nodes. So here, if we go down a bit, we can find the start button. So click on it. And this represents our start button node. So now that we have this button, we can call a function on it. So write dot. And once again, we have all of the possible functions. And we're going to call a function called grab focus. With this line of code, it will make our start button be selected by default, and then we'll be able to use the arrows. So to test it, first save the file and launch the game. And you can see that the start button is highlighted by default. If you use the arrows of your keyboard, you are able to cycle through the options. Now there are still some issues. For example, if I'm on the exit button and I press the down arrow, it doesn't go back to the start. And the same thing happens for the start button if I press the up arrow. So to fix that, it's fairly simple. I go back to my title screen scene. I select the start button, and in the inspector, I'm going to find the focus category. And inside of it, I have some fields called neighbor left, top, right, bottom. All I need to do is to assign the exit button as the neighbor top of the start button. This way, when we press up, the neighbor above the start button will be the exit button, so it will cycle. So if I click on assign for the neighbor top property, I can select the exit button and click on OK. And I'm going to do the same thing for the exit button, but instead of assigning the neighbor top, I'm going to assign the neighbor bottom. So click on assign, select the start button and click on OK. Now, if we launch the game, we can cycle through the options with the arrows. We can also press a button with the spacebar, but if we are on our level scene, we can't go back with the spacebar because we haven't told Godot that this back button should be selected by default. And the same thing happens for our options page. So we can do that real quick. So if we go back to our script view and go to the backbutton.gd file, we can add the ready function, just like with our title screen script. And inside of it, we can just call grab focus. We don't need any reference to anything else because in the level scene and the option scenes, we have attached the script directly on the back button. So in the title screen, we needed to find the reference to the button in the children of the title screen node, which was the root node. But here, it's the same node that has the script, so we don't need to do that. So now if we save this file, the keyboard control will work in all of our scenes. And there is one last thing I want to show you, and it's how to control the menu with WASD instead of the arrow keys, which can be a bit annoying. So to do that, we need to go to the project tab at the top left corner of your screen in project settings, and there we're going to go into the input map tab. There we can see a list of input actions with names like UI accept and a list of all of the keys that are assigned to that action. The ones that are used by default for cycling through our buttons are at the bottom of this window, and they are called UI up and UI down. So if we press the plus button next to the UI up input action and we select key and then press the W key, click on OK. We do the same thing for the UI down input. So click on plus, key, and press S. Now we'll be able to control our buttons with those two keys instead of only the arrow keys. If we want to be thorough, we should also add the D key to the UI right action. So click on add event key, press D, OK for the UI right input action. And for UI left input action, we're going to add the A key. Now if we close the project settings window and launch the game, you should be able to cycle through your buttons with the WASD keys. And we now basically have a completely functional title screen for our game.